Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. Today we are chatting with ACA's Executive Director, Marylouise Serrato. Welcome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for having me back on the program.
So let's dive in. What has inspired ACA to launch the America at 250 fundraising campaign?
The America at 250 fundraising campaign, Citizens Everywhere, Home and Abroad, Always Citizens, was launched to coincide with the 250th birthday of the United States. Obviously, this birthday is a huge, huge milestone for the country, but it also aligns with a milestone for ACA. We're coming up shortly, not this year, but shortly on our 50th anniversary of being an organization, and also at a moment when we are really positioned for a lot of success with many of our issues: taxation, voting, government services, representation. A lot of people are concerned about the tax legislation and what's going on in that space. And we really do feel that we're at a pivotal point now with tax legislation, having a piece of legislation introduced into Congress, and that is currently still being worked on both in the House and in the Senate. So we think that this all really, really does align quite well. And also, it's a good time to remind the country that it should celebrate all its citizens, and not only those living in the United States, but those living abroad, and also the importance of the United States just worldwide.
Why is it important that Americans living overseas be part of the national conversation around this milestone?
U.S. citizens living overseas contribute to the U.S. in a variety of ways. Our demographics show that we have citizens living and working overseas in a myriad of industries and positions, in nonprofits, running the foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies, individual consultants, small businessmen, trailing spouses and partners. All these individuals are really important and should be a part of the national conversation. The United States should understand what Americans are doing overseas and how they can advance our issues. We are really focusing a lot of late on how these citizens really can help advance U.S. economic and strategic issues. This is a big, big priority for the administration, and it is also something that both parties support in varying degrees. The best advocates for the U.S. are its citizens, and they should be overseas representing not only the country, but also our products.
How many Americans currently live outside the U.S., and why are their voices often overlooked?
We have done extensive research. ACA's sister foundation, ACA Global Foundation, which is a 501c3 that is responsible for doing research and education. We've done several rounds of research, one back in 2018 and another in 2022, and we're continuing with that research as we speak. And we believe the community to be between 5 and 6 million. One of the issues with getting a voice has been the fact that these citizens, they don't all live in one state. They don't all live in one specific congressional district. They're spread across 50 states and a myriad of congressional districts. So sometimes it's hard to get one representative aware of the issues. But I can tell you now that ACA has been at this for almost 50 years, since we created headquarters in Washington, D.C., the voices of these citizens are being heard. And ACA is a big part of that. Also, a big part of that is just these citizens getting in touch with their representatives and voting. So I think the misconception that Congress isn't aware and isn't hearing from these citizens, that's not completely true. There has been a huge advancement in awareness up in Congress. Again, we're up in Congress, available 24/7 to advocate, inform, and educate. And we definitely see a huge difference in offices' awareness of the problems, in how we did business years ago when we did annual fly-ins, and how we see awareness having grown now that we have really boots on the ground. It's rare that I will go into an office and they won't be aware of some of the problems that I'm reporting, whether that's on voting, taxation. That's a huge advancement for the community and for ACA.
What unique contributions do Americans living abroad make to the US? And how does ACA view the role of overseas Americans as informal ambassadors for the US?
So that's a great question. The list is really quite long. As I mentioned before, the unique contributions really vary. We have citizens, like I said before, who are working as doctors, as teachers, and NGOs, running businesses. So that's a really important contribution. In terms of informal ambassadors, I always go back to using the example of my experience from living overseas. I was living in Brussels, Belgium when 9/11 happened. I know that I was inundated by Belgians and other foreign nationals that were living in Brussels at the time, and friends of mine who really wanted to have a better understanding of the United States. They had sort of a bird's eye view, they had an impression from what they had read in the media. But in speaking with me, they were really able to understand our political system, how the American mindset, if you can use that word, what America is like, that we are not just one homogeneous group of quote unquote Americans, that there are differences regionally. So it was really, I could see, really helpful with educating these foreign nationals on what America is all about and how it works.
Similar to the last question, in what ways are Americans living abroad helping shape America's next 250 years?
So I think Americans overseas are helping to shape the future by just being out there and being sort of these informal ambassadors, being on the ground, meeting people and engaging in conversations, but also in helping to advance our exports, our strategic interests. That is going to be a big deal going forward. I can see this on the world stage with the things that are going on right now, that it's really important for the United States to be in places and to have boots on the ground so that they understand what's going on. So I think Americans going forward are going to be very helpful in this regard. Spreading US ideals, that's again the idea of informal ambassadors, much like the Peace Corps during the Kennedy administration, having citizens living worldwide to help and assist with NGOs, and also to help others better understand America and Americans, and vice versa.
How does America at 250 help to highlight the challenges Americans abroad face that people in the US may not realize? And what projects or advocacy efforts will donor support make possible? And lastly, what impact can a donor expect their contribution to have?
So, a lot to cover there. What we want to do with our fundraising for America 250 Citizens Everywhere is we really want to help ACA, the organization, further our advocacy for legislation and regulations that will help US citizens living and working overseas. We are primarily a volunteer organization, so our work relies on our membership and our donations. And a big piece of the puzzle to help advance on all these issues, again, not just taxation, but on other issues like voting and government services and representation. We're even looking at things in terms of Medicare and extension of that for Americans overseas. A big component that we need to advance is research. I can't really stress enough how important the research on our community is and how much that contributes. This is a big thing up in congressional offices. When we have our meetings and we're talking about the problems, they always want to know how many people are affected. What do these people look like? What is the demographic makeup? Where are they living? And there really is very little research and data on the community. There are some limited demographic studies, but ACA, again, through our sister organization, ACA Global Foundation, conducted two huge, very large research projects in 2018 and 2022. And that was in support of tax legislation. But it also gave us a really good snapshot on the community, what they were doing overseas. We have done subsequent research, and we are currently doing and talking about research projects that are in the pipeline. We're working with consultancies and trying to update our numbers from our last 2022 research, our big research project, and looking for opportunities to do other research on the community. And all that, again, just really underpins our advocacy efforts. More education, more data, that's the key to success on Capitol Hill. Your donation will help fund that research. It would also help fund our advocacy. That's my day job. That's the 24/7 knocking on doors and being available to Congress. The funding will also help with that effort.
How does America at 250 support ACA's long term advocacy efforts? How does the campaign tie into ACA's work on residence based taxation?
There was legislation introduced in 2024 by Congressman LaHood, and that legislation now is currently being refined, and it has bicameral support. Research is going to be really important to the work that's going into that piece of legislation or any residence based taxation legislation that's being looked at. Again, America 250 is about raising funds for that research and for our advocacy. Right now, we know that the Joint Committee of Taxation, JCT, is looking at numbers on the cost of that legislation. We know that Congress obviously will greatly rely on JCT and on their expertise, but they will also consider and value private professional research. And that is definitely needed because even government offices don't have the full picture on US citizens living overseas. Other organizations such as ACE that have done research like ours, we have missing pieces to the puzzle. We are always welcomed by JCT. We've had numerous meetings with them. They always appreciate us coming in and are very receptive to what we bring to the table. And that research is going to help. It's going to help JCT. It's going to help the offices that are working on this legislation. And it's going to help them refine numbers. And it's really going to help to push this legislation along. Arguing about RBT, needing it for fairness. We all know that fairness is a huge issue, but that's not going to win the day in Congress. Numbers and research on how the community contributes economically to the US, how it's made up demographically, how much this legislation will cost. That's going to be an important piece of the puzzle. And with our research, we're aiming to help congressional offices get that research and get those answers so we can get a really well drafted piece of legislation with a really good number.
Are there opportunities for overseas Americans to participate beyond donating?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for asking. We're always looking for volunteers. Obviously, donating is super important to the organization, like I said before, and membership, because that's how we raise the funds to do the work that we do. We're always looking for volunteers. People should just go to our website and join our write-in campaigns. I think every time I've been on a podcast or an interview, I tell people, join our write-in campaigns. You don't have to be a member. They're listed under advocacy campaigns on our website. You go right in, you put your address in. There's a variety of campaigns, one in support of RBT, in support of voting, in support of many of the issues that we hear from the community. And these really work because your messaging gets into offices. We look in the back end and we see a groundswell of communications that go into one particular Senate office or congressional office. Then we follow up. And I can assure you that when I do that and I walk into that office, they will tell me that, yes, we heard about the problem and we heard about it through constituents who used your write-in campaign. So those really do work. Sometimes I think people get a little frustrated. They might use the write-in campaign and they might get very much of a boilerplate letter back from an office, but that shouldn't discourage you. And anything you do get back, send it to ACA because that's how we use our entry into getting into those offices, as well as our back end information to know where the messaging has gone.
What common misconceptions about Americans overseas would you like to correct?
So I guess there are a couple, but the big misconception and less in Congress these days than with the general public in the United States. There is this misconception that US citizens overseas are not contributing to the US and they're mostly wealthy and they're overseas looking to avoid paying taxes. We all know this. Anybody listening to this podcast knows that this is not true. Our numbers show that, in our research shows that this is not true. And we've demonstrated this to Congress. From a statistical standpoint, there are not more super wealthy individuals overseas than there are in the United States. And like I said before, Congress has a much better understanding of this. I have seen, again, since we have been headquartered in Washington, D.C., and have a more ongoing, regular interaction with offices, there is less and less of this misconception being parroted back to me. That is working, getting that messaging up into Congress, whether it's through our writing campaigns, our direct advocacy, and the advocacy of other organizations. We are seeing a change. With the US general population, it's a little more difficult because obviously they're getting a lot of their information from general media, and sometimes we're not really well represented there. I would love to see that misconception overturned. The other misconception is that a lot of times we see that people think that US citizens overseas have left in protest to US policies or issues going on domestically. We're not saying that there are not people that have left for these reasons, but our data really shows that the majority of the population has moved overseas for many other reasons, and that being because they've married a foreign national, they've gone over for a job, they've gone over for education. They've gone over because they would rather live sort of a digital nomad life. So that's another misconception we'd like to have diminished.
What do you hope policymakers in DC will better understand about Americans abroad as a result of this campaign?
We hope that Congress will understand the problems that they're facing. And again, on a variety of issues, not just on one particular issue. We hope that our research and our meetings in Congress will show legislators the importance of US citizens overseas for US economic and strategic interests. We really want them to just have a better understanding of the community and to understand it in a way where they are motivated to take the lead on making regulatory and legislative changes and policy changes.
How can younger Americans living overseas become involved in ACA's work?
This is a really great question. A lot of times I run into younger Americans overseas because even though we're headquartered here in Washington, D.C., we're back and forth overseas visiting either where our chapters are located or where there's a groundswell of Americans. And sometimes young Americans will say, well, I'm really not affected by the taxes. I'm really not affected by the voting right now. And I would just say that you will be. The longer you stay overseas, the more some of these issues will percolate to the top. Taxation is a great example. I mean, some people are under some of the filing thresholds, or they're under the threshold for being able to use an exclusion with their foreign taxes. But life changes. You may decide to stay overseas. You may grow in your career, become a real mover and shaker in whatever you're doing. You may want to live in various different countries. You may want to move around. And the issues are going to grow with those decisions. I would say to the younger generation, join ACA, get involved. Plus, if you join ACA, you have the ability to apply for a State Department Federal Credit Union bank account, which is, I would say, the insurance policy for Americans overseas because it always gives you access to a US based bank account. ACA has your back on these issues. Someday they may become very important to you.
If the founding fathers could see today's global American community, what do you think would surprise them the most?
So I think what would surprise them the most is probably how little the Congress and the administration knows about the community, and maybe the kind of lack of understanding of their importance. Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and more understood the importance of having US citizens overseas, not just to secure financing for a revolution, but in creating relationships to advance our economic well-being and also to bring back to the United States the experience of living overseas, the ideas that were percolating and happening in other places in the world. I think that not only comes back to the US in a maybe positive sort of economic way, but also to help Americans in the United States understand a little bit better what's going on worldwide and what individuals on the ground are facing. So I think the founding fathers understood that, and they might be surprised to see that's not being as valued as it should be. And I think they'd also be surprised to see that some in Congress believe that using foreign nationals to represent the US overseas in business and strategic endeavors is better than having boots on the ground.
If listeners remember only one thing about America at 250, what do you hope it is?
Of course, I'm not going to tell you there's one thing. Well, I'll start with the biggest thing. I hope that they remember America at 250 is really the moment to support ACA. As I mentioned before, we are really well positioned to advance on these issues, but we need funding to help us augment that. We need more advocacy up in Congress. And the big thing is we need more research. I can't go back to how important research is. ACA has created the relationships in Washington, D.C. We are a registered lobbyist, so it's always great to have independent lobbyists and consultants, but we are registered lobbyists and we do have these relationships that we have been cultivating for a long time, and we keep on top of those and on top of changes. We're always welcomed, like I said, in a lot of the key offices, tax writing committees, the Joint Committee on Taxation, the Government Accountability Office, IRS, the Treasury. We have those relationships, and that's very important. And we're here, we're headquartered in Washington, D.C. We're not just coming in once a year or twice a year. The offices know us, they know how to reach us. That's really important. That's key to advancing because you really do need to keep on offices and on these issues. You need to have a presence. So we really feel that ACA has the entire package, and we really need the community support.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
So I would just say I forgot to mention in all of this, but I think I mentioned it when I was talking about the youth. One of the huge advantages of ACA membership is that you can apply for a State Department Federal Credit Union bank account. We have a long relationship with SDFCU. They're a really, really good institution. And this gives you the ability to maintain a US-based bank account, where of late some of the regulations that are out there make that a little bit difficult for Americans overseas. So I always say it's like purchasing life insurance. It's a great thing to have if you're thinking about going overseas. If you're overseas, it'll come in really handy, even if you think, well, I've got nothing I need to pay back in the US, but you may one day, you never know. No one can 100% predict the future. And like I said, really important to the younger demographic. You just don't know what's going to happen in the future. So get yourself prepared, join ACA, and apply for an SDFCU account.
Thanks for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Michelle.
The content of ACA podcasts, including documents and presentations, is made available only for general information purposes. It is not intended and should not be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of American Citizens Abroad, Inc. or any affiliated organization. ACA does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any content or other information. ACA disclaims all liability and responsibility arising from any reliance placed on any content or information by you or any other person. ACA is nonpartisan and does not support any political party or candidate.